Let me tell you the story of how New York became a city of skyscrapers. The transformation of New York into a city of skyscrapers is the coincidence of a bunch of different factors that came together in one place and at one time. If we go back to the second half of the 19th century, then during that period, New York was a dynamically growing port city. First of all, this was due to the fact that the city had an ideal natural deep-water harbor, protected from wind and ice. And secondly, the city had an ideal geographical location and conditions for organizing logistics to the interior of the United States. Therefore, thanks to the coincidence of these factors, the port infrastructure began to develop actively in the city. And over time, after the Civil War, New York became the largest port city in the United States. To understand the scale, 2/3 of imports and more than 1/3 of exports of the United States passed through the ports of New York at that time. And such a high concentration of international trade led to the fact that various trading companies began to appear in the city. The only problem was that every company wanted to have an office closer to the port, but there was very little space to build a separate office, especially in Manhattan. So the main question was how to accommodate more companies in the same area. The answer was to build upwards. At the same time, despite such an obvious idea, for a long time the development of skyscraper construction was hampered by technical limitations. Because before the advent of mass production of cheap steel, the main problem for high-rise buildings was the stability of the structure. And the taller the building, the thicker the walls of the building itself had to be, especially near the foundation, to withstand the weight of the building. For example, when the architect William Totehill decided to build Carnegie Hall, he purposefully abandoned the steel frame, but instead he had to build very thick walls. At that time, the use of load-bearing structures made of cast iron and iron was also practiced, but they had their drawbacks. For example, the first skyscraper is considered to be the 10-story home insurance building built in Chicago, for the construction of which an iron frame was used. However, after a large-scale fire in Chicago in 1871, which led to the destruction of buildings with iron frames, this concept began to be treated more cautiously. And a truly revolutionary solution appeared only when Andrew Carnegie's factories began to produce cheap steel. Along with the advent of cheap steel load-bearing structures began to appear. The main advantage of which was that they allowed the load to be transferred to the internal structure and not to the walls, which made it possible to build taller buildings. It can also be said that another important technology was the safe elevator. In general, various types of lifting devices began to appear in ancient times, but the problem of such devices has always been the safety of the structure. And everything changed when in the 1850s, engineer Elisha Otis created an elevator with a safety system that prevented the cabin from falling if the rope broke. Well, this in turn made the upper floors of buildings accessible and even prestigious. The economics of building skyscrapers also played a decisive role. Land in Manhattan was extremely expensive, and therefore developers sought to use every square meter of this land as efficiently as possible. Therefore, building skyscrapers became one of the solutions to maximize profit from one piece of land. After all, additional profit was generated by each floor on which office or residential premises could be placed. Perhaps one of the most interesting examples was the construction of the now very famous Flatiron Building. In 1901, entrepreneur Harry Black purchased a small plot of land with an area of 836 square meters for $2 million. Moreover, the problem with this plot was that it was in the shape of a triangle and one corner was very sharp, which created certain difficulties for construction. However, the new owner did not want to lose even a meter of this land and ordered the building to be designed in such a way as to squeeze the maximum profit from each meter. And so the famous triangular 22-story skyscraper appeared. Over time, in the 20th century, a real race for height unfolded between companies. The height of buildings no longer had only an economic justification, but also had a symbolic meaning. Skyscrapers demonstrated the status and ambitions of companies. Large corporations wanted to have headquarters that would emphasize their power. The height of the building became a metaphor for success. And so skyscrapers began to shape the identity of the city. The silhouette of New York with its dense buildings and tall towers became one of the most famous in the world. And skyscrapers became a visual symbol of capitalism, innovation, and urbanization. And without exaggeration, we can say that skyscrapers are not just buildings, but a symbol of the era and a demonstration of economic growth of both the city itself and the United States as a whole.